It's a funny thing, but the word Nokia, well, it actually comes from the Finnish word for a pine marten, that sort of sleek, dark weasel.
Right. A pine marten. It's a surprising little nugget, isn't it?
It really is. And it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the pretty unexpected story we're diving into today.
Absolutely. For so many people, you hear Nokia and you immediately think of those mobile phones, the ones that were absolutely everywhere back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. Totally dominant.
And it's true. For a whole decade, starting around 1998, Nokia was the undisputed global leader in mobile phones. No question.
The undisputed king. But, what's really wild is thinking about how this company, the one we associate with those little pocket gadgets, actually started its life way, way back, 19th century, as something completely different.
A paper mill.
A paper mill. So our aim today is really to unravel that incredible journey, trace its path from, those really humble industrial beginnings right up to where it is now a major player in global telecoms and tech.
It's a huge historical arc. We're talking over 150 years, and it's packed with these big strategic shifts, some genuinely groundbreaking innovations along the way.
It really sounds like a story of constant change.
Definitely. It touches on industrial evolution, huge technological leaps, and even a bit of Finnish wildlife with that pine marten link you mentioned.
Okay, let's dive back, way back. Chapter 1 takes us right to the beginning, 1865 up to the 1960s. And it's all about the genesis, paper, rubber, and cables. It's almost hard to picture the Nokia we know starting out in heavy industry like that.
It really is quite a contrast, isn't it? The story kicks off with Fredrik Idestam. He was a mining engineer, had a real entrepreneurial spark.
Okay.
So May 12th, 1865, he sets up this ground wood pulp mill. It's on the Tamerkoski Rapids in Tampere, Finland back then, part of the Russian Empire. So the very, very first activity was paper pulp.
Paper pulp, not phones. Definitely not phones. And things didn't stay just paper for long, did they? What pushed them to branch out so early?
Well, exactly. Just 3 years later, 1868, Idestam built a second mill. This one's bigger, more powerful, near the town of Nokia. He chose it because the Nokianvirta River there offered much better hydropower.
So the location was key. Better resources.
Absolutely. A smart move for efficiency. And that location, of course, is where the company eventually got its name.
Right. And in 1871, it officially became Nokia Ab, named after the town and the river. It's interesting how geography and resources kind of shaped its identity right from the start. And again, that name Nokia, meaning pine marten. A little bit of nature baked in.
Indeed. But the story gets more complex. It wasn't just paper. In 1898, you have Edward Polon founding Finnish Rubber Works Suomen Gummitehdas Oy.
Rubber Works, what were they making?
Things like galoshes, rubber boots, other rubber products. And crucially, their factories were also near the town of Nokia. So you have these two major industries, paper and rubber, growing up side by side, basically.
Okay, so paper and rubber in the same area. Sounds like the start of a very different company than the one we ended up with. How did they come together?
Well, after the First World War, Finnish Rubber Works was doing okay financially, but the original Nokia company, the paper one, was struggling a bit.
Okay.
So Finnish Rubber Works actually acquired the Nokia company. That brought the paper and rubber sides together under one umbrella. Probably a strategic move driven by the economic situation at the time.
Makes sense. Consolidation out of necessity, maybe? And the diversification didn't end there, right?
No, not at all. In 1932, Nokia then acquired Finnish Cable Works Suomen Kaapelitehdas Oy. This company started back in 1912, made things like telephone cables, telegraph cables, electrical cables.
Total. Okay, now that sounds a bit closer to telecommunications.
Exactly. This acquisition is really significant. It's our first real clue, looking back, of Nokia's future direction. Even though mobile phones were decades away, it shows they were already moving into, the emerging communication technologies of that era.
So by the mid-20th century, you've got paper, rubber, and cables. Quite a mix. And they all formally merged later on.
Correct. 1967. That's when Nokia Aktiebolag, the paper part, Suomen Gummitehdas Oy rubber, and Suomen Kaapelitehdas Oy cables all merged to form the modern Nokia Corporation we sort of recognize the roots of.
Right, bring it all together.
One unified company, all those different industries.
And before the phones took over, their product list was just wild. Car tires, bicycle tires, rubber boots, even toilet paper. It's almost funny thinking the same company made galoshes and eventually cutting-edge phones.
It really is. It definitely highlights the need for resilience, maybe, especially operating from a small home market like Finland. Diversifying like that spreads the risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Precisely. And it built this really robust foundation, lots of different operational skills, varied expertise, stuff that probably seemed unrelated then, but turned out to be valuable later.
And they even made military gear.
They did. Things like the M61 gas mask back in the 60s, and later, in 1983, the Sonomolate M90 communicator. So they had engineering chops in specialized areas, too.
Okay, so from this really surprising industrial base, how did Nokia make that huge leap, the jump into electronics and telecommunications? That's Chapter 2, right? The 60s to the 80s. What lit that fuse?
It was a gradual shift, but definitely transformative. Driven by new tech, new market opportunities opening up, their formal entry into electronics really started in 1960 within that cable division we talked about.
Okay, the cable guys, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't just about making basic wires anymore. It was a conscious move towards, higher tech manufacturing, investing in new skills.
And they jumped into some pretty advanced stuff quite early, didn't they?
They really did. As early as 1962, that same division produced a pulse height analyzer. That's a complex electronic device used in nuclear power plants.
Wow, okay, so serious electronics.
Yeah, it showed they could handle complex engineering. And by 1967, with the big merger, they established a proper, independent electronics division within Nokia Corporation, giving it that dedicated focus.
And wasn't there something about that division not being profitable for ages, but they kept it going?
Yeah.
That seems unusual.
That's right. Apparently, it operated at a loss for its first 15 years. But crucially, the researchers there were encouraged to work on their own projects.
Really? Like a skunk works kind of thing?
Sorta, yeah. It fostered this really important culture of innovation. There must have been this underlying belief in the future of electronics, a willingness to invest long-term, even without immediate profits. That research culture is seen as absolutely key to their later success in mobile.
Okay, and then came the Nokia DX200 in the 70s. That sounds like a big deal.
Oh, it was pivotal. The DX200 was a digital switch for telephone exchanges. The key thing was its modular design.
Modular, meaning?
Meaning phone companies could upgrade or expand their systems piece by piece instead of ripping everything out. Huge advantage, saved a lot of money and hassle. It made it incredibly versatile, became the real workhorse for Nokia's network equipment side.
And it was super reliable, too, wasn't it, that 5 nines thing?
Legendary reliability. Yeah, often exceeding 5 nines, uptime 99.999% reliable. That means like minutes of downtime per year, maybe. Absolutely crucial for phone networks. It really helped build Nokia's reputation as a trusted infrastructure provider.
And this DX200 tech, it actually helped them get into mobile networks, too.
Directly. In 1984, they started developing an exchange specifically for the NMT network, that's Nordic Mobile Telephone.
Ah, the first generation cellular, 1G.
Exactly, the world's first fully automatic cellular system. And they based that NMT exchange on the DX200 architecture. A huge step. And by 92, after some shuffling, that whole division became Nokia Telecommunications, really signaling their focus.
So while the network side was building up, they were also getting into the phones themselves. This is where it starts to feel like the Nokia most of us remember.
That's right. They actually started making mobile radio telephones for commercial and military use back in the 60s. Then they teamed up with another Finnish company, Salora, from 1964.
Laura.
And that led to VHF radios and something called Autoradio Puhilin, ARP, basically car radio phone, from 1966. Not really mobile like we think of it, but the start of mobile communication in Finland.
Car phones. Those massive brick things you see in old movies. A world away from today. And Finland was pretty quick to adopt this stuff, wasn't it? Why was that?
Yeah, Finland's first commercial mobile network, the ARP network, launched in 71, and incredibly, it had 100% coverage across the country by 1978.
Wow, full coverage that early.
Yeah, it gave Nokia a great test bed. Maybe Finland's spread out population, the importance of business communication.
Yeah.
Those factors likely drove that early interest in adoption.
Then came Mobira Oy in 79. Nokia and Salora again.
Yep, a joint venture. Mobira was specifically set up to make phones for that NMT network, the 1G system that went commercial in 81. A big technological leap.
And Mobira launched their first NMT car phone in 82. The Senator. Yeah. But it was pretty chunky.
Chunky is an understatement. The Mobira Senator weighed 9.8 kilos. That's nearly 22 pounds.
22 pounds. Good grief. You wouldn't be carrying that around.
Definitely not. Very much a car phone. But things started shrinking, thankfully.
Like the Mobira Talkman in 84.
Exactly. Under 5 kilos. Still hefty, but a big step towards portability. And that same year, 84, Nokia bought out Celora completely, renamed the division Nokia Mobira Oy, showing more commitment.
And then, 1987, the Mobira Cityman 900. Well, that sounds like a breakthrough.
Oh, it was revolutionary for the time. Only 800 grams with the battery. Nokia's first truly handheld mobile phone for the NMT network. It was expensive, though. Became a real status symbol.
And this is the Gorba phone, right? The famous picture.
Yeah, that's the one. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was snapped using one in Helsinki in '87. The picture went everywhere. Nickname stuck. The Gorba.
Huge publicity, I bet.
Massive. It put Nokia on the map internationally. Associated them with cutting-edge tech, world leaders. You couldn't buy that kind of advertising.
And just 2 years later, 89, Nokia Mobira becomes Nokia Mobile Phones. Crystal clear focus now.
It's amazing, though. Didn't some people inside Nokia initially think these phones were just, like, James Bond gadgets?
Apparently so. There was some skepticism early on. But that early investment, sticking with it despite the doubts, that was absolutely crucial. They built expertise, got a foothold in a market that was about to explode. Shows the importance of foresight, right? Yeah. Believing in something new.
Definitely. Okay, so that leads us into Chapter 3, the era of mobile phone dominance, the 90s through the mid-2000s. This is when Nokia basically became mobile phones for millions. What fueled that explosion? This was Nokia's golden age, no doubt. They completely transformed into the global leader. Part of it was technology, part was understanding the market, and part was just timing a massive global demand for personal communication was taking off. Plus, you had telecom markets opening up, making phones more accessible.
And GSM was huge for them, wasn't it? The new digital standard.
Absolutely pivotal. Nokia didn't just adopt GSM. They were central in developing it and pushing it globally. They delivered their first GSM network in Finland back in '89.
Wow.
And then July 1st, 1991, a historic moment. The world's first ever GSM call on a commercial 2G network was made in Helsinki by the Finnish Prime Minister, Harry Holkeri.
Using a Nokia phone.
Using a prototype Nokia GSM phone. That really marked the shift to digital mobile as we know it.
The real beginning. And then the first actual GSM phone people could buy was the Nokia 1011 in '92. Even the number was a nod to the date.
It was. 1011 for November 10th, 1992. That phone brought digital mobile to the masses, really. And then, of course, the ringtone.
Oh, the Nokia tune. You still hear it sometimes. Instantly recognizable.
Isn't it? Came out in '94 with the 2100 series, officially named Nokia Tune around '98, based on a 19th century guitar piece, funnily enough. It became like the soundtrack of the era.
It really did.
Yeah.
And Nokia was great at more than just the tech, right? Design, features.
Totally. They had phones at all sorts of price points. They were constantly innovating, putting cameras in phones with the 7650 in 2002, their first camera phone, adding internet features.
And the custom covers. Remember those? Popping off the front and back?
Oh, yeah. Huge trend. Letting people personalize their phones. It was smart marketing, connecting with users on that level.
And their market share just kept growing.
Unbelievably. By 2007, they had over 40% of the entire global mobile phone market. Just staggering dominance. They were a true icon.
And two phones from that time were just legendary. The 3310 and the 1100. What made them so special?
Oh, the icons. The 3310 launched in 2000, sold 126 million units. People loved it because it was tough as nails, the Nokia brick nickname.
Indestructible.
Pretty much. And the battery lasted forever, and it had Snake 2. It just became this cultural touchstone. Reliable, simple.
And the 1100. Even bigger seller, wasn't it?
Even bigger. Launched late 2003, sold over 250 million, the best-selling phone handset ever, and the best-selling consumer electronics device, period.
$250 million. Why was it so popular?
Super simple, really affordable, great battery life. It was massive in developing countries. It brought mobile communication to millions who couldn't afford fancier phones. Their billionth phone sold ever was actually a Nokia 1100 in Nigeria in 2005.
That really shows their global reach. Understanding different markets.
Absolutely. So pulling it all together, what were those key success factors?
Well, it seems like a mix. Recognizing the mobile potential early on.
Yeah.
Pouring money into R&D. Making phones that were innovative but still easy to use. That brilliant connecting people branding.
Yeah, that was powerful.
And then aggressive global expansion, especially tailoring those affordable, durable phones like the 1100 for emerging markets. Plus, really efficient supply chains, local manufacturing. They just seemed to anticipate what different people wanted.
A winning formula for a long time.
But it didn't last forever.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Chapter 4, the smartphone challenge, the decline. Mid-2000s to 2014, it's kind of a classic cautionary tale, isn't it? How quickly things can change.
It really is a classic case study in disruption, because despite being utterly dominant in feature phones, Nokia really struggled when smartphones started taking off. The whole game changed: operating systems, touchscreens, app ecosystems.
And a big part of that struggle was clinging to Symbian, their own operating system. What went wrong there?
Symbian was the heart of their smartphones for years, like the N95 in 2007. But yeah, it became a massive vulnerability when Apple's iOS and Google's Android showed up.
Why couldn't it compete?
Several reasons, really. Its internet experience felt slow, clunky compared to the new guys. Even though it was technically open source, they didn't build that thriving developer community like Apple and Google did.
Right, the apps weren't there.
Exactly. You had maybe 10,000 apps for Symbian eventually, while the others were hitting millions incredibly quickly. Developers found Symbian's coding language, C++, difficult compared to the newer platforms. The user interface started to look really dated, not built for touch.
So it was hard to adapt.
Very. The whole architecture wasn't flexible. Trying to make Symbian work well on a modern touchscreen phone apparently took ages, like up to 22 months for development. Way too slow.
22 months. And the smartphone world, that's like an eternity. And wasn't there some internal resistance, like not wanting to admit Symbian was falling behind?
Yeah, reports suggest leadership was reluctant to acknowledge Symbian's weaknesses publicly, and the internal culture. Maybe it made it hard for bad news to travel upwards, a focus perhaps on hitting short-term targets rather than making the big, difficult, long-term changes needed. Organizational inertia set in.
And the result was just this catastrophic drop in market share. It's stunning how fast it happened.
It really was. Smartphone share went from almost 50% in 2007 down to like 3% by mid-2013. Just plummeted. Their overall share tanked too.
So desperate times.
Yeah.
Leading to the Microsoft partnership in 2011.
Exactly, a huge gamble. Nokia's CEO Stephen Elop and Microsoft's Steve Ballmer announced this big alliance. Nokia would ditch Symbian, ditch MeeGo, another OS they were working on, and go all in on Microsoft's Windows Phone as their main smartphone OS.
Windows Phone, that felt like a surprise move at the time. What was the thinking? And why didn't it work out?
Well, the potential upside was getting a modern OS, a fresh interface, backed by Microsoft. But Windows Phone itself was late to the party. And critically, it lacked apps.
The app gap again.
Yeah, the app ecosystem just wasn't there compared to iOS and Android. That was a killer. People buy phones for the apps, right? So even though Nokia's Lumia phones, running Windows Phone, were often really nice hardware.
They were. Some of those cameras were great.
Right. But the Lumia range ended up being pretty much the only significant Windows Phone player. It dominated that small platform, but the platform itself just couldn't gain traction against Apple and Google. So Nokia tied its feet to a struggling horse, essentially.
And that led to the sale.
Yeah. September 2013, Microsoft announces they're buying Nokia's entire mobile devices business. Billions of euros. End of an era, really. Nokia was out of the phone-making game they once ruled.
And Microsoft later had to write off billions from that purchase, too. Just shows what a tough market it had become and maybe how challenging that integration was.
Absolutely. It really highlights things like, well, complacency maybe. Failing to see just how fundamentally the market was shifting towards software ecosystems, touch interfaces, sticking with Symbian too long, internal issues. The Microsoft bet just wasn't enough to turn the tide.
A dramatic fall. But crucially, Nokia's story didn't end there. That brings us to Chapter 5, Reinvention. 2014 to now. It's actually an impressive comeback story, isn't it? How did they pull that off?
It really is a compelling story of strategic reinvention. After selling the phone business, Nokia didn't just disappear. They made a very deliberate choice to refocus, back to their roots, in a way.
Which were?
Telecommunications infrastructure, network equipment, plus technology development, licensing their patents, basically the stuff they were doing alongside the phones, but now it became the main focus.
So back to the networks, but bigger and better.
Exactly. They sold off their mapping division here and then made a massive move acquiring Alcatel-Lucent. That deal closed in November 2016.
That was huge, right? Billions.
Huge, $15.6 billion. It massively boosted their position in the network infrastructure market, brought in all of Alcatel-Lucent's expertise in things like fixed networks, IP routing, optical transport.
And Bell Labs. They got Bell Labs in that deal, too.
And Bell Labs, the legendary research arm. So suddenly, Nokia had this incredibly comprehensive portfolio. They could offer service providers pretty much everything they needed, end-to-end, made them way more competitive.
But they've kept adapting since then.
Yeah, constantly tweaking their organization, shifting towards cloud-native software as a service models. keeping pace with how the industry itself is changing, moving away from just selling boxes to providing ongoing software and services.
So paint a picture for us. What does Nokia look like today? What are they actually doing?
Today, Nokia is primarily a B2B company business to business, a technology innovation leader focused on mobile networks, fixed networks, cloud infrastructure. They're a major global player in telecom network gear, operating in over 130 countries.
And financially, what are the big areas?
In 2023, the revenue breakdown was roughly network infrastructure, the biggest chunk at $12.6 billion, then cloud and network services at $6.4 billion, Nokia Technologies, that's the licensing and patents, at $1.6 billion, and a growing enterprise solutions part at $2.1 billion.
And they're still at the cutting edge of network tech, 5G, 6G.
Absolutely. Major player in 5G rollouts worldwide, something like 17.6% market share in the 5G RAN equipment, the radio access network part. And they're investing heavily in what comes next, 6G.
6G, what does that even look like?
Well, they're aiming for commercial launch around 2030. The vision involves deeply integrating AI, advanced sensing, way faster connectivity, talking about things like a digital sixth sense. Still early days, but they're deep in the research.
And you mentioned enterprise solutions growing. What's that involve? It's not just telcos buying their gear anymore.
Right. They're increasingly selling directly to large businesses and industries. Things like private wireless networks for factories or ports, industrial IoT systems, critical communications for transport or government, providing the network backbone for all sorts of digital transformation.
And Bell Labs is still cooking up futuristic stuff.
Oh, yeah. Nokia Bell Labs is still a powerhouse, working on everything from quantum computing to, get this, communication networks for the moon.
A network on the moon.
Seriously. Seriously. Part of NASA's plans. Plus, advanced AI, new sensing tech using things like synthetic diamonds, even exploring quantum computers for drug discovery. The innovation engine is definitely still running.
Wow. And just to loop back, the Nokia brand is back on phones now too, isn't it? Through a licensing deal.
It is. Since 2016, a company called HMD Global has been licensing the Nokia brand to make smartphones and feature phones. Their market share is still pretty small, under 2% maybe in 2023.
So Nokia itself isn't making the phones, but the brand lives on.
Exactly. But Nokia does still make money from phones indirectly through Nokia Technologies. They license their essential patents to pretty much every major phone vendor out there, and that brand awareness, built over decades, still incredibly high, over 90% globally. People still associate Nokia with trust and reliability.
So wrapping this all up, Nokia's story is just this incredible, almost unbelievable journey of constant reinvention across completely different industries.
It truly is remarkable, starting with that paper mill, then rubber, cables, becoming this mobile phone behemoth, the dramatic fall, and now this successful pivot back to network infrastructure and high-tech innovation. It's a masterclass in adaptation, really.
Yeah, the key takeaways really seem to be how important that early diversification was, building that initial resilience, then the absolute need for continuous innovation, adapting to huge market shifts, the impact of internal culture, both good and bad, and maybe most impressively, the ability to actually recover from a massive disruption and find a new path forward.
Absolutely. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you wonder about today's dominant tech giants. Which ones have that capacity to adapt and reinvent themselves when the next big disruption hits? Because Nokia's long, winding, surprising history shows that even the biggest players aren't immune to change, but resilience and reinvention are possible.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that dominance can be temporary, but adaptability can be enduring. Nokia's story certainly encourages you to look deeper into how companies evolve, how technology disrupts, and what it takes to survive and thrive over the long haul. A truly fascinating legacy.